Cleveland. Indrid cold being seen in Cleveland, very important. What does it say about Indrid? Well, I did an article recently where I wrote about Indrid and what I think he was all about, and I talked about the symbolism of Indrid with Indra, the god of fire in Hindu mythology. Indra is very closely aligned with Garuda. The two go hand in hand. In fact, the Garuda stories usually involve the Garuda taking the fire of Indra into himself, putting it out. You know, in other words, the fire of corruption, of crime, is stopped by the Garuda. He sucks up the heat. So if you have a cold Indra, it transforms Indra into something that can continue to work in the future. Like as civilization is about to destroy itself in fire, the Garuda cools it down. Indra becomes something else. Indra no longer exists. So what exists is this Garuda who's taken on who's taken the energy of Indra away. He is now an Indrid entity. He is of Indra. He is like Indra. So a cold Indrid, an Indrid cold would be a Garuda who has subsumed the fire of Indra, become Indrid cold, and is a cooled down version of the Garuda. So what the symbology of what Indrid was saying by his name is that he was a cooled down Garuda, which gives you an indication that perhaps some of these MIBs are shape-shifted Garudas in human form. Or it's a total covert operation out of Cleveland, just using Hindu terminology to fool people. It could be either one. At this point, it's hard to know. But it's interesting that there was a psychiatrist involved with Indrid and Woody. I'm wondering if it's the same psychiatrist that was working on my friend Tommy when we were kids, because Tommy was under psychiatric care. And what happened to this guy? He just disappeared. He claimed that the whole Indrid story was true, and yet he's gone. No one can find him. His name apparently is known, but no one can find him. I don't know his name. So I've been running Indrid cold through the anagram computers and things and trying to figure out what it meant. One of the things I came across involving the Tad Jones sighting in Dunbar was the fact that it was next to Union Carbide. So I was doing some research on Union Carbide, the corporation, and found that they had been implicated in the James Earl Ray assassination of MLK. It appears that Carbide had access to the records of one of the men that James Earl Ray impersonated as he fled from the assassination. I also found some interesting articles about Union Carbide on eBay and odd places, the actual magazines from 1941 or whatever, 1961, different ones. And they point to the fact that Carbide had an amazingly, they were way ahead of everyone in terms of technology. I think it was the 61 article mentions that Union Carbide has grown artificially matched the Martian landscape. They've done experiments where they recreated the Martian landscape and discovered all of these things about life forms that then affected their technology because they were always trying to come up with really advanced materials for the military industrial complex. And in Keel's Mothman book, I think it's page 98, he talks about most of the entities had names that sounded like synthetic fabrics. When you think about synthetic fabrics, you think about the German industrial giants like Bayer, IG Farben and Bayer. And yesterday I was leafing through looking at some old footage that I'd shot in the 80s in West Virginia and saw that Union Carbide and Bayer had bought into each other somehow. There's all these mergers going on in the chemical industry. It's been going on for decades, apparently. Ownerships are always changing. But IG Farben, Bayer, were the leaders in synthetic fabrics, as well as union carbide. But I was thinking, but the kicker was in the book Flight of the Garuda, the mention that the name Indra, or the Indian deity, Buddhist deity Indra, I don't know if Indra is specifically Buddhist, but the Indian deity connected with fire, the element fire. The Garuda is the totem animal for that, for Indra. So if Indrid cold, and cold being a name that Keel mentions is used in Celtic lore for energy spots. The name cold would be applied to, it'd be cold manor or something, and that would be on the ley lines that you find in England. They've done a lot of research on these. The same names like red and black. By the way, there was a Mr. Black on Woodward Drive, a very odd character too, by the way, who seems to have a real interest in Tommy's family, Timothy Tommy. Anyway, so Indrid Cold, which, by the way, I looked for several clues trying to figure out what Indrid Cold was an anagram for, and I couldn't find any. But I could find company names that you could get Indrid Cold out of. And one of these company names was Jetta Oil and Drilling Company, which is where David Ferry was working when he was in the Cleveland Civil Air Patrol. This is a man who apparently was Oswald's CIA handler, so to speak. One of his handlers. I guess Ferry taught Oswald how to fly, and anyway, Ferry was notable in the JFK lore because he was killed right, I think, the day before he was supposed to testify before the Garrison grand jury. So Ferry actually was just of interest to me because he's mentioned in the books as looking like he was wearing a fright wig all the time because he had alopecia and he had strange sexual proclivities and things too. So I guess he was indicted a couple of times for child molestation, but he wore these outrageous eyebrows played by Joe Pesci in the movie JFK, and this fright wig. It was supposed to be a toupee or something, but it looked like a fright wig. And so that's why I was interested in Ferry. And Ferry is of interest because he called Huntington, West Virginia in 1962. And this is a guy who was a pilot, flew around all over the country doing things for the mob and the CIA, contraband, things like that. And interestingly enough, he was reported to have been involved in weird medical research involving cancer and trying to give people cancer by injecting them. And there's a lady in the documentary that was on the History Channel who said that she was Lee Harvey Oswald's mistress, and she and Ferry and Oswald were injecting people prisoners with things to see, if cancer would develop. And the cancer thing has come up before here in the Woodward Drive story because so many. I think in the 70s we were hearing that there were 60 different people who had gotten this rare angiosarcoma at Union Carbide, which could be attributed to the chemicals. But just the cancer link was of interest because my dad was sort of how do you say? I don't want to say rabble-rouser, but he had some noble ideals, I think, about equality and democracy, and that those sometimes came into conflict with his employer, Union Carbide. And we've often speculated that he may have been taken out his best friend had been car bombed not too long before that. So, but when I had this epiphany of Indrid, cold, perhaps meaning a code for fire, hot fire. In other words, Indrid may mean of Indra, of the fire god exemplified by the Garuda. Cold. So a cold version of the hot fire god Garuda. Cold version to me would sound like it's become more solid. It's cooled off. It's come through the dimensional vortex. It's hot. It's cooled down and it's formulated itself into this strange-looking man in black. So it is, in fact, the Garuda cooling itself down, becoming shape-shifting into the man in black. And the answer is right there in the name. But one would have had to have looked at the Buddhist literature to find this out. That's one of my points on the Mothman list, where my ideas are not being... There's a lot of strange things going on. There's all these strange hoaxes that occur right when I'm saying something like I've just said. Some breakthrough, some important clue, symbolic clue, like the synthetic fabric names of the entities. There's always a hoaxer who comes in from a different computer with a different name. Who are these people that have this many computers that they can log on and off all the time? I mean, they're obviously sophisticated. But the approach, the things that they say are deliberately stupid. Or just like pretending that they're 13 years old and, typical law enforcement kind of approach. So yeah, the list appears to be manipulated, and I guess if they're trying to keep the lid on international racketeering, well, I guess that's a good reason. Trying to put the lid on it. So we'll let them keep the lid on it. I'm interested in the fact that the Garuda can cool down and come through the dimensional vortex, tell you who he is, and have so many people be baffled by that. It's amazing. It's fascinating. Hi, you just saw scenes of the Kadampa temple here in Seattle, of the Dzogchen lineage in Tibet. The leader of the Kadampas is a man who is now caught in a deep schism with the Dalai Lama over the future of Buddhism in Tibet. Geshe Gelsang, who visualizes the Garuda. The Dzogchens in Tibet, in the eastern part of Tibet, still worship, if you will, this ancestral bird-man deity. Yet the Dalai Lama is saying that's a superstitious thing. We shouldn't worship that or spend any time on that deity. If you remember on those images, you could see the Garuda, Vishnu well, in this case, Dorji Shugpa, I think that's his name. Dorji Shugden is the deity who rides on the back of the Garuda. And so those are images of Dorji Shugden and some of the other deities. Garuda, there was a lion, elephant, tiger. These are vehicles for the deities to fly on. And the Dalai Lama, we're going to get into an interview here at this location with a practitioner, a great Buddhist thinker, John Veltheim, who's actually from the Nath tradition in India, but they are one and the same with the Tibetan Dzogchens, in that they both visualize the Garuda and come from the same root source, which is the actual, from an actual disciple of the Buddha, from the Buddha himself. It's a lineage that's gone unbroken down through the centuries. But before we talk to Veltheim, I just want to talk a little bit about this dispute with the Dalai Lama. And today I was just noticing it's September 11th, 2005, and they're having President Bush is there giving a stiff appearance for the victims, even after so many people in his administration seem to have had prior knowledge that something was going to happen. They still go out and give lip service, I think, to the tragedy. It was so beneficial for them, this 9/11 tragedy. It's really beefed up military spending and so many other things. Bush, the oil prices are skyrocketing. So this is all working out great for Bush. He's there. But of course, this doesn't really mean much there's not really a spiritual leader, really, on this day, except for the Dalai Lama, who is speaking in Sun Valley, Idaho, which is kind of an odd place to do this, since it's sort of the stronghold of right-wingers. So why is he there? I don't know. But if you trace the history of the Dalai Lama coming out of Tibet and the aid that he got from the CIA and the paramilitary side of the military, you can see that the Dalai Lama has an allegiance to them. And I think it makes sense for the CIA to make allegiances with this important Buddhist leader and to co-opt the movement of Buddhism as much as possible. And I think they're successfully doing that. You're literally seeing the Dalai Lama now on this huge day of mourning, because we just had this Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. Everyone's mourning. Well, there's the Dalai Lama to provide the spiritual guidance, and he's going to fit into capitalism. Whereas someone like Geshe Kelsang here, well, he's actually in England, but he has a church here. Kelsang talking about the Garuda, talking about Dorji Shugden, Vishnu, the other deity that's very closely aligned with the Garuda, Vishnu and Indra, talking about these things, these ancient knowledges, is outside. He's this is what you're going to see. You're going to see Buddhism increasingly, I think, limited to a certain role that's going to like Catholicism. It undergirds the military and political establishment. Some of these Tibetans, by the way, that were helped out by the CIA in 1959 when the Dalai Lama left, these guys later became contract agents and were stationed in Camp Carson, Colorado, high altitude, where it would be good for their bodies. They would be able to stay healthy there. But this may account for some of the sightings of Tibetan men in black that came, because Camp Carson is suspicious in other ways as well. It's also the sort of the headquarters of the mysterious Carlos Allende before he died. He was stationed there and lived there. Carlos Allende, of course, connects to the Philadelphia experiment, so there we sort of have a little connection there. This Camp Carson thing and the Mothman, or at least with my father, and the men that perhaps were taken from the Philadelphia experiment into West Virginia to work and be watched. Also, Camp Carson had a odd serial killing spree that I remember reading about as being connected to the mind control assassin world. So probably have an assassin school there as well, and perhaps an assassin school using some of these Tibetans. It's been written about by Lauren Coleman, at least the subject has, CIA, Tibet, cryptozoology, the search for the Yeti connection, where these cryptozoologists were connecting up with, were literally CIA agents like Tom Slick, who was stationed in the South Pacific in the Navy, by the way, which is where my dad was stationed. I'm still trying to figure out if he was on the island of Saipan, where Tom Slick had his CIA operation. But so far we have no record that my dad was involved in any of that. What else? Dalai Lama. Did you notice my sister was talking about this crazy man who had stolen her ring and tried to threaten to kill her, who she had once dated, from Indiana? He was from Indiana. He was a drug trafficker, hairstylist. I met the guy who's a lot like Charlie Manson. Manson, in fact, was also not from Indiana. He was born in Cincinnati, but he spent a lot of reformatory time in Indiana, and that is where people think he came under the spell of whatever controllers he came under, because even at a young age, he was written up in the newspaper in Indiana because he was going to Boys Town for further disciplining. But he was dressed in a suit, and they had high hopes for him. You get the feeling that he was from a family that mattered, or that he had a father who mattered, and that they were tracking this kid, because we still don't know who his father was. We know his mother's name was Maddox. We know that she was married to a Colonel Scott, so she was married to an army guy, officer, and that we know that Manson, by the way, I just found out he seems to have a hang-up with the post-war situation after World War II. He definitely has fascist and Nazi beliefs. We all know that. And so he's really one of their guys. He's not a hippie. He was not a hippie murderer. He was a fascist. He had a swastika carved in his head. He seemed to have and I have an interview that I recently saw, where he stated that he really felt bad for those at Nuremberg who were tried and convicted, even though there were only, I think, 6 hung or 13 men hung. Manson seemed to think the number was much larger. And he said that the judge who first put him in jail later became a Nuremberg judge. It's a really bizarre clue that whoever put him into the correctional system originally was CIA, because they would only send CIA judges to Nuremberg, or someone with heavy political connections to do that kind of work. And it makes you wonder where he got these strange ideas, these pro-Nazi ideas. Probably from the air, like it hints that someone there in Indiana or West Virginia or Ohio, that it points to this underlying system of belief. My sister also mentioned zombie AK as being a phrase that she kept saying, and that was a strange phone call. And the only thing I can think is a zombie killer, and it's almost like another clue coming around at the same time, pointing to zombie killers. A zombie AK, as if someone is shooting an AK-47 who's a zombie. I also got a strange phone call that same day that she called me about that, telling me about the drug trafficking of her former boyfriend. I got a strange phone call from a drug dealer who thought I was another drug dealer on my message machine, which I was going to put on here, but I don't really have time. But it's very odd. Never gotten a call like that before. I called my sister one day and got the Ramada Inn in Huntington twice. It lasted 2 or 3 days. They couldn't explain how I was getting hooked up to their hotel when I was calling her number. And at that time, I also read that the Ramada Inn was a CIA-backed chain. Could never figure that out. But by the way, Indiana, I wanted to mention, was the home of the Jonestown, was Jim Jones. That was where he linked up with some of the people that were in the SLA, the Symbionese Liberation Army. They were all from Indiana, the ones that kidnapped Patty Hearst, the ones that had been doing experimentation on prisoners. So that was all very strange with my sister. Moving on now to John Veltheim, who's going to talk about symbolism of the Garuda. He's a realized master, if you will, in the Nath tradition. Studied in India with some of the Garuda teachers.
Mm-hmm. See, what happens is that all these gods are really, it doesn't matter whether you're talking about Eastern philosophy or Western Jungian psychology. We have in history, in the Greek mythologies, and Roman mythologies, and Egyptian mythologies, and Indian, Chinese mythologies, you have these symbologies or archetypal symbologies of consciousness and the way people think. And in fact, if you really go into it and you start breaking them down, you'll realize that so many of the ancient mythologies are really descriptions of the states of thinking and the states of consciousness of people and how they function. And in fact, in Indian work, it's even more specific than that. For example, the actual shape of the gods is actually an anatomical drawing of parts of the brain. So, for example, one of the more common gods in Indian mythology is Ganesh, and he's the remover of obstacles, and he has the same function as many of these other gods. But Ganesh is the guy that when you go to a temple, you pray to him first, because he's considered a holder of the gateway to higher consciousness. So you've got to get past Ganesh before you can go to the bigger gods, the Krishnas and all those. And he's also considered, therefore, he removes the obstacles of getting what you want. And lay Indians keep a Ganesh in their rooms to remove the obstacles of making money or doing better in their jobs. But in fact, when you look at the brain, the Ganesh drawing is actually a drawing where, if you actually see the brain from a certain angle, the brainstem, the pons of the brain is his head, these ears are the cerebellum, and his trunk is actually the brainstem. So it represents this lower part of the brain. And when the Kundalini energy rises up the spine, it has to get through this region in order to get to the higher levels of consciousness. So in the process of awakening, you have the energy coming up, but before it can actually go into the brain to activate higher levels of consciousness, it has to get through this area of the brainstem, the pons, the cerebellum, which is represented by Ganesh. And you'll actually see it, and that the drawing Ganesh is an accurate drawing of that particular part of the brain. And in fact, virtually all the Indian gods are actual anatomical drawings of different parts of the brain. And if you know the qualities of the god, you also know the physiological functioning of that part of the brain. Even though they were formed thousands of years ago, they're still in keeping with modern day understanding of physiology.
Any guesses about the Garuda, looking at it?
You know, when they talk about him as being an assistant, an assistant to higher consciousness, an assistant to holding you in the state, when you make progress, he helps keep you there. Then you've got a situation where that's an archetypal energy that you can use as a focal point to try and help stabilize whatever's going on in your life. You can do that using lots of tools. I mean, a lot of spiritual practices are for that. Very often the shifts that occur because of all sorts of patterns, and one could say, oftentimes the shifts occur at the most unexpected time, sitting watching a sunset or having a walk along the beach. But once that shift occurs, it is the spiritual practice you've been following, whether it be with a guru or using these archetypal energies or using meditation, that actually can help to maintain it. Because what is common in the early stages of the awakening process is people will go through a realization or a shift. They go through stages of bliss and joy and feelings of oneness with the world, and they think, they've made it, as it were. and within a few days or a few months, it's gone again. And they can get quite depressed about it, because once you've savored that, then that becomes an obstacle. You can't even get back there once you've lost it, because your expectations are too strong. And so the concept of these props, or these archetypal energies, is to keep you focused and to help to maintain the practice, rather than get caught up with the ego sensations of the moment of the joy or bliss or whatever, which is experienced in the earlier stages of awakening.
One of the things that happened to me as I've been researching the Garuda, I went back to a spot back east where some people had seen this man bird, and I encountered an energy field. And through my interactions with this field, walking into it, I experienced some kind of Kundalini experience, and then a few months later, it was discovered that I had an entity, or that maybe it may have been a leftover energy force from this experience. I'm not sure, but is it possible that when you experience these deities and you have a Kundalini experience, is there a shadow side to that comes up that because I had some frightening kind of visions and things that evening. With every realization, is there like a shadow thing that you have to deal with?
Yeah, well, very much so. Okay, for a start, the statue you've got here has you holding snakes, I believe, right? And snakes, of course, are the symbol of Kundalini. So obviously he has a very strong relationship with the snakes. In fact, the coiled cobra is considered the ultimate representation of manifestation or Kundalini. The coil at the bottom is the feminine principle in the pelvis, and the head coming up is the masculine principle, or the phallus or phallic symbol, and it penetrates the feminine symbol, and out of that, the male penetrates the female, you get manifestation. And the head of the cobra represents the brain. So that coiled snake is the Kundalini.
There's another statue I didn't bring that has him standing on a female serpent.
Right. And therefore, it's obviously going to be very tied in, because almost all awakening processes are related to Kundalini energy. Now, the key about the Kundalini energy is it's a mixed bag, because we all have our shadow side. We all have the dark, because paradox is always there. What we've got to realize in life is that this manifestation is a manifestation of paradox or polarity. So you cannot have the concept of above without the concept of below. There is no such thing as dark unless there's light. There's no such thing as light unless there's dark. Inside, outside, up, down, masculine, feminine, positive, negative, which means you can't have good without evil. Good can't exist without evil. Evil can't exist without good. So they've got to be there, which means that the human nature is that we always have the shadow side. There is always the good and evil side. And we accumulate and have a great deal of that negativity in the system. And when it's encountered through a very strong process of Kundalini, which is an activation or exaggeration of anything that's going on within us, this is why personally, I always advise students to stay away from any form of Kundalini practices, particularly trying to raise the Kundalini, because when you raise the Kundalini, you open up a can of worms, because if you've got any form of blocks in the mind or any form of imbalances, that Kundalini is going to amplify them in the process of exposing them or burning them out, and the process can be quite horrific. The concept is that the Kundalini will arise when you're ready. So the concept is to make yourself ready by purging yourself and clearing all the stuff, getting your thinking right, getting yourself into a masculine feminine balance, getting your concept of paradox balanced. When that occurs, the Kundalini will rise, and it will facilitate heightened awareness. But in society, particularly in places like China and India and that, they have these Kundalini practices, the Qigong practices and Tantra practices and Kundalini yoga, where they deliberately, do things like bouncing up and down on the ground and everything to force the Kundalini up. But what happens is when you force Kundalini up into a brain that's not ready for it, it exaggerates all the fears, all the distortions, and will very quickly lead to insanity. And I've spoken to doctors who talk about, whole hospital wards Literally, we're talking hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people in hospital wards that they call, the Chinese term for it is different, but Kundalini wards. In other words, people who have gone insane as a result of delving into Qigong practices to raise Kundalini. I would also say that rampant Kundalini accounts for probably nearly 40-50% of people in our institutions here in the Western world and in India and places like that, because people have, for various reasons or in various ways, the Kundalini has risen, sometimes it's drug-induced. Some LSD experiences and hallucinogenic experiences can unleash a Kundalini, and if it unleashes it in a mind that isn't ready for it, it will be a very negative and very destructive experience. And hence, you don't play with it. You wait until it arises because you're ready. And if it does arise, sure, then what happens is, in any form of imbalance in the body creates some form of energy metaphor to represent that balance. And you can call it an entity, you can call it a possession, you can call it a psychic experience, or mental disturbance. It's an energy that is basically harmful to the body. And hopefully there are some people who can treat it and help you to treat it.
You've developed a system yourself that I took advantage of a few months after my experience that helped me. Mm-hmm. Can you explain to folks what that is?
Well, the Body Talk system is another system of energy medicine. Energy medicine's got a long tradition. Acupuncture, kinesiology, all those show that, the fact is energy affects matter. And if you can affect energy, you can affect matter. It's a matter of having an understanding of how to affect it. I've developed a system that enables us to work with all the energy systems of the body at the various levels of consciousness, beliefs, attitudes, emotions, and right down to the deeper, lower frequency energies that have a direct effect on physiology, biochemistry, things like that. But essentially, with energy medicine, you are looking at balancing the energy patterns of the body in order to facilitate a healthier balance in the body, so the body you can encourage the body to heal itself. Another aspect of it is that with energy medicine and a lot of these types of medicines, it's raising the awareness of what is wrong. It's very often people are sick because you could define sickness as a lack of awareness or, ignorance. So you get a person who, for example, has had a very stressful life and they do a lot of tense things, and they gradually get a tension posture where they get this feedback loop that causes them to raise their shoulders, tighten their neck, bring their shoulders forward, and they end up living like that and wandering around with their neck tense and tight like this and not even aware of it. Next thing you know, they're complaining of tension headaches, shoulder pain, numbness in the fingers, backache, and so on. And very often that's just a loop. And what can happen is you can come along and say, hey, have you noticed that your shoulders are up and that you're holding them tense, etc.? And you give a little nudge there and you say, I never realized I did that all the time. And they drop their shoulders. You've made them aware of the problem. They suddenly drop their shoulders, and within an hour or two, their headache's gone, their numbness is gone, and they feel $1 million. So what you've essentially done is raise their consciousness or their awareness of their problem. And so much disease is that. And you could say with Body Talk, we just have a very sophisticated way of raising that consciousness, bringing them to the attention of the innate healing powers of the body, or from a medical point of view, the brain, and let the brain go ahead and then fix the problem. And we've found that a lot can be done without the need of major intervention, such as drugs or surgery and things like that. Although obviously there are still going to be times when they're necessary. The whole point is, from a physics and mathematics point of view, they're talking about the manifestation is made up of an incredible range of frequencies. It's all frequencies. And they've shown how metaphorically, if you put all the frequencies of manifestation as they know it with mathematics and physics today, and put them metaphorically over a mile, then what they're saying is that what we perceive with our normal 5 senses on a day-to-day basis of that band is actually 1,000th of 1 inch of that mile. So we don't know very much about what's going on out there. Now, sometimes because of different patternings that happen in the brain, which can be induced by a blow to the head, can be induced by a drug, alcohol, a particular experience, a change in biochemical makeup of the brain, an allergy reaction, a tumor, just environmental conditions. Your subtle senses expand and you see a little bit more, and you see 1.5 of 1,000th of 1 inch of that mile, and you'll see things that other people can't see. You suddenly see energy fields and things that your brain tries to interpret, and you'll interpret them according to your background. If you're seeing an energy field and you're trying to make sense of it, then you may call it an angel, you may call it a spook, you may call it many other things. It'll all depend on your background and your culture. And so what we're saying is, you may see that extra section, and then someone else will see this extra section, so they see something entirely different. Now, all those things, there is a tremendous amount that we don't know about. But the key factor is the knowledge doesn't necessarily contribute to our human experience or to our being able to live effective lives. And in fact, the lack of understanding of it can create a lot of problems, because it really comes down to you're having this strange phenomenon coming in, and your belief systems and your attitudes are having to interpret that. And that interpretation can be very subject to wild distortions. It comes right down to what comic books you read when you were 8 years old as to how you're going to interpret it. And so as such, it becomes a very unreliable phenomenon. And hence it can actually become dangerous to you, because you've gone into the realms of free association of imagination based on often childhood experiences or cultural conditioning. So as such, it becomes a crapshoot as to how much benefit you derive from it. So unless you've got someone who's got a lot of experience in the field, really knows what they're talking about, and there's plenty of people who say they do, and I've studied the field for most of my life and I know nothing about it. I know enough to know how little I know, put it that way. Then I suggest that you put it down to, wow, I had that experience, like you may have tasted the best ice cream in the world, or seen a two-headed snake in Burma sometime, and think, well, that's an interesting experience. But be careful, because if you want to go exploring in Burma, in the jungles, it's very wise to have a guide. You don't just blunder through the jungle picking up all the snakes and trying all the flowers. If you want to explore what I call spooksville, as an affectionate term, the psychic world, you need a damn good guide who knows what they're doing, and they're few and far between. To dabble in it is like dabbling in going into the jungle without any experience of walking through jungles. You don't know it, you haven't got the knowledge, and you can misinterpret everything. And what looks like a friendly snake is actually a deadly python. Yeah, unfortunately, one of the products of our society is that we do not respect the fact that we don't actually respect our own science, because our own science tells us there's a hell of a lot out there we don't understand. There's a hell of a lot of phenomenon that they can show going on all the time that doesn't make sense. Let's face it, pure physics, quantum physics does not make sense. They've shown all these different things that, that defy logic, and yet they can prove that that's the way it works.
Faster than light communication.
Yeah, things that communicate faster than light. One thing can be in two places at the same time, and that there is actually nothing there, and it's actually basically there is no thing called an atom. There are no things that make up the atom. They're actually concepts, probabilities, thoughts, etc. In other words, there's no substance. And yet, while they're talking all this in physics textbooks, they're poo-hooing some of these experiences that people have, which sometimes may be the result of too much alcohol indigestion, and sometimes they're very genuine, because the fact is, very reliable, very intelligent people who are sober do experience these experiences, and several people from different time and different walks of life can experience the same phenomenon. They go into a so-called haunted house and see the same phenomenon. So they do exist. But of course, my warning is, you have to be careful. A, so you're not ostracized by your Western society, and B, that you don't get so involved in it that you end up, it becomes a pathology to you. It's like anything else. If you get over-involved in something, it becomes a pathology, whether it be alcohol, eating ice cream, or any other pursuit. And the pursuit of psychic phenomena is a little bit more treacherous because it can open up centers of the brain that can actually stimulate kundalini flow, which can actually create, unfortunately, pathologies of the brain.
I've heard you speak of the energy flowing through human beings as having an electrical, thinking of it as electrical impulses. You were speaking yesterday of the human mind and how it goes to it can't think infinitely. It can only go to there and then plus one.
Yes. Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah. Well, this is our problem in trying to understand the world. Is that we try and philosophize, but we've got to remember that in the conscious mind that we deal with, we are dealing with linear thinking, and our brain, our conscious brain, has got tremendous limitations in it, because we talk about a concept like infinity. We haven't got a clue what infinity is, because we use the ridiculous terms. We say the infinite edge of the universe and then wonder what's a mile the other side of it. We talk about the infinite beginning of time, but then wonder what happened an hour before it. You see, we can't, and we talk about infinity plus one, or double infinity. You hear people using terms. Infinity is infinity. It has no ending. It has no limitation, and we can't even comprehend it because we actually have to compartmentalize it. So this is the problem when we start talking about time before time and everything like this. This is why in all the advanced philosophies, you will never find the big solutions to the big things with the conscious mind. The big questions are who's God, who made God, how did it all start, what was the original cause, and then what caused that. These are questions that we can talk about, we can write books on, but you will not get answers to with the linear mind, with the conscious mind. That is why, when people actually do go through what we'd call realization or advanced levels of consciousness, there is a knowing of the answers to these questions, but a total inability to express that knowing in words that make sense to the conscious mind. What in fact happens, and the experience that happens, is that because the knowing is there, the questions cease to be asked. So you spend 20, 30 years as a seeker asking all these questions, needing to know the answer of them, and then what happens is you go through this shift, and suddenly you go through your days, weeks and months without those questions popping to mind, because at the appropriate level of consciousness they have been answered, so that tension isn't there anymore. And that lack of tension is the peace of the knowing, but it's understanding beyond understanding at the deepest level. However, if then you have students come along and ask you those same questions that you used to ask, then the answers you give them are only going to be a distortion of the truth. They're just going to be pointers to the truth, because you cannot put your understanding or your knowing into words. And that's the problem, that you go to these gurus and they're all going to give you slightly different answers, and they're going to seem contradictory. And the reason is they're wrong. They're only the closest thing they can get to approximate their experience. But the experience is an experience that is beyond the realms of linear conscious mind thinking.
Can you describe your tradition? Tell people what it is. It's the Nath tradition, is that correct?
We tend to, I have a very wide background. I've studied all the different philosophies and religions and everything like that, and I like to think I have a Western concept, and I tend to be more based on quantum mechanics than that. But my spiritual tradition would have to be described as Advaita Vedanta. It was the ancient Indian from the Shankara line. And that is the study of, Advaita means not one, and it's the study of the philosophy of Jnana Yoga, which is the study of, I'm trying to understand the nature of the mind, the nature of intellect, and the nature of the universe by using, at first, intellectual logic, and using intellect as a tool to break down intellect. In other words, to deconstruct belief systems and to break down concepts. So, one of the philosophies in that is if we want to know who we are, we can never know who we actually are. But what we can clearly establish is who we're not. And if we can establish clearly exactly who we're not, then we're anything that's left, and as such define who we are. But it's sort of the only abstract way you can deal with this type of philosophy, this type of understanding. So I guess it's more Eastern than anything else. But what you find is that once you go into the depths of Eastern philosophy, you find an exact parallel in modern, quantum mechanics, physics, mathematics, and most other religions at the higher levels.
After I spoke with you last night, I had and again, it's hard to describe to someone using words, but I had a sense of a description of what it's like to move toward awakening, and it has to do with going from an individual perspective to seeing things from a universal mind perspective, and actually using that language every day, and just consistently seeing it that way. Does that sound reasonable?
That's one way of seeing it. Yeah, it's going from the basis of thinking that you are a bunch of concepts and ideas, and that you are, made up of all this body and everything like that, and an individual, and there's you and the rest is the world. Whereas what gradually happens is you start to realize there is a unity in everything, and that you do definitely get a broader category of seeing that it's all part of the same big picture, and that you're part of an even bigger picture. There's still an awareness of the boundaries and the self-identity, but it takes an entirely different perspective when you get the broader view. You see the Earth, people who live in a little part of the Earth and have never been anywhere, and a Martian comes down and says, describe the Earth. The guy in the desert is going to say, well, the Earth is all sand and the water is down in holes, and that's the way the Earth is. But if they get someone from Thailand, they're going to say, well, it's all water, and you walk on top of the water on boats and on trees, and they're both describing Earth, and they're both very accurate. But they've only seen it from one perspective. And you might say that as you become more aware or more conscious, you tend to become the astronaut. And you start seeing Earth as a kaleidoscope of many, many different terrains and many different textures, and you start seeing a much bigger picture. So as a result, you become much more tolerant of all the different viewpoints, the different religions, and you start seeing them all as, they're basically all in the same big planet. But you see, through consciousness and collective consciousness, we do manifest a lot of psychic phenomenon. My general explanation on that is, for example, for hundreds of years in Ireland, they had leprechauns. The fact is, leprechauns existed because reliable people who were sober saw them, and many people from different, situations would go into the same glade and see the same leprechauns and describe the same ones, because they were part of the consciousness of Ireland, right? And then after the Industrial Revolution and the scientific thing came over, and they started teaching all the kids about science, and basically saying, no, leprechauns don't exist, plus the Catholic Church decided, no, leprechauns aren't a good idea, so they preached from the pulpit they don't exist. What they actually did is altered the general consciousness of Ireland. And as a result, the leprechaun population dramatically declined. So now you've just got a few isolated pockets of leprechauns in little villages where they still hold that consciousness, right? And they have their leprechauns. And even tourists can often have encounters with these leprechauns. Now you'll get other civilizations in Iceland where they have their own version of the leprechaun, the divas, where they're actually recognized by the government and government protected, so they're still thriving and healthy, and a lot of people see these little phenomena. And they're strange little phenomena. Their houses are little bunches of mushrooms in a particular formation. And under law, you can't disturb those mushrooms or pick them. You can go to jail for doing that. That's the protection they're afforded. Now, this is a collective consciousness. And all the different cultures have them. As their consciousness change through the introduction of Western concepts or science, very often that change. But you will still get an energy build up for a period of time where particular people with a very strong affinity to that and maybe a pretty determined consciousness state can actually perpetuate one of those mythologies, as it were, or those psychic phenomenon, and keep them alive, and so and maintain them. A group of people, you get pockets of people in different parts of the world where they put it together. Aboriginals in northern Queensland have this little green man, and they actually build their beds very high off the ground. They're 4 foot high off the ground because little green men are 2 foot high, to make sure little green man can't get up in bed with them and hurt them. And the trouble is, reliable people have seen these little green men, right? In other words, it's part of the folklore and hence the consciousness of that particular Aboriginal tribe.
Well, that's exactly what happened in the area that I grew up. There was a consciousness that this Mothman existed. Now, I don't know how it got started exactly, but once it got started, everybody got behind it.
Yeah.
And it lasted a certain amount of time.
And you'll get it. I mean, in America, you've got a situation where, because of the very strong influence of television, you'll get people touched by an angel got going. And people really got into it. They take their stuff seriously, and as a result, we actually started developing an angel population, as it were, where more and more people were seeing angels and being touched by angels, as it were, because you had multi-million audience where even if only 10% of the audience bought into it as real. And of course, as we know, in America, people do, just the soap operas alone, that, someone in a soap opera gets married, the film studio gets inundated with wedding presents. Or if someone dies in a soap opera, they get inundated with people wanting to know where the funeral is so they can attend, because there is this whole percentage of the population who actually have those soap stars as real. They actually see it as real. And if they happen to meet them in real life and one of them's a real bastard in some way, they'll get quite aggressive with them. How dare you do that? You hurt that poor Susie and made her pregnant and all this. And they're beating up the actors because they're the real people to them. So, we play these games. This is the power of consciousness and the power of the mind, and the power of when people get together with common beliefs, they can manifest at a subtle level enough energy that other people can even perceive what they've manifested.
Is there an interaction between this consciousness and the Earth? For instance, in the Mothman country, there appears to be geomagnetic areas, or geographic locations where the energy is stronger. That's where I experienced my Kundalini, and like with Maharshi in India, he went to this mountain and he stayed there his entire life.
Oh, for sure. There are hotspots, as it were. For example, they've done computer analysis of different meeting points of the Earth's magnetic currents, and there are certain points where these meeting points are extremely strong, and they found they're associated with the position of all the pyramids, both in, say, Northern Africa, but in South America and everything. And an area where they're very, very strong is in New Zealand, where there's a whole series of them. But they went out and did a study, and every single one of them is where there's a marae. In other words, their religious center right over that spot, and that is their sacred ground. And the Aboriginals have their sacred ground, although they tend to be high electromagnetic iron ore underneath it, because when you walk onto their Bora ring, your hairs stand on the end, and it's actually because of the sort of high magnetic field that's there. So there is no doubt that different fields of electrical energy and magnetic, because remember, these psychic phenomena are still frequencies, they're still energy. Thoughts are energy. And any form of energy and frequencies can be influenced by other electromagnetic frequencies. So if you have parts of Earth that are generating electromagnetic currents and frequencies and vortexes, they will attract certain phenomena. So yeah, it makes good sense that there are particular parts of the world where there are more ghosts or more, more psychic phenomena occurring. There are other benign parts because it's all sandy desert with no iron ore, etc., where it's very boring from a spookspill point of view.
Crop circles. Any ideas on crop circles? What's behind them? Do you think it's guys with boards?
Well, obviously it has been. They've exposed a few that have been boards, but the whole idea in the first place is it appears there's been quite a few that they couldn't put it down to that phenomenon, you see. So But you see, like all these things, with the credibility, if all they got to do is they can have a whole phenomenon like that, and they just got to get proof that one or two of them were like that, that were done by farmers trying to get attention or whatever, or having fun, and then that they use that to throw the credibility of all the others. This is a great phenomenon. It's like some of the books that are written where they have a lot of really good information, but it's challenging to the powers that be. So in it, there's a couple of mistakes. So what they do is they grab a couple of mistakes, and then they use that to throw the credibility of the rest of the book, which was well written and well documented, and throw it out and say it must all be rubbish because we found this passage, this sentence that was wrong.
Expand that out to politics. I know I don't want to get too into politics too much, but we just had this election, and people are despairing that they've lost control.
Michael Moore was a good example. He put a thing together that had a lot of very interesting facts in it, but because he speculated and probably over-speculated on a few things to the point of stretching credibility, they could very then easily use those few sentences and few phrases to then discount everything he did. And if you want to discount it, then you'll do it. I mean, we most people are scared, most people are frightened. And whether it be politics or science or paranormal, when we are frightened and scared, what we'll do is we'll find an escape route. We'll find something to discredit. We'll find an example where that was a hoax. It's I think a great example was the guy Uri Geller. Remember he used to bend the spoons? Now the fact is, he could bend spoons. The fact is, I remember when he came to Australia, he was demonstrating to people, and he had kids bending spoons. They were doing it. But the thing is, what he discovered was he couldn't do it routinely on demand. He had to be in the mood. But then he was putting on a show every night. And because he had to perform on the show every night, he actually used a magician's trick. I got a magician friend who can do the spoon bending trick using sleight of hand that looks very realistic. So he had to train himself and learn to do that so he could put on a show every night. Then, of course, he was caught out that it was actually shown that he did do that on stage. And, of course, that meant they automatically branded him that he was a charlatan, that he couldn't do it at all. But unfortunately, that's the problem with a lot of these people with special gifts, is because they can't perform on cue, they cover themselves by learning how to do it like a David Copperfield, so that they can go on and do their show. And trouble is, when they're exposed, then of course their whole credibility gets thrown out of the window, even though they could in fact do the trick. This is just a technique that we use in order to feel good about ourselves and to try and explain phenomena away. And unfortunately, so many gifted people fall into the trap of getting caught up in the commercialization of their gift, and therefore get caught out, probably unjustly. My advice is this, that if you want to ask someone their advice on something very important, it'd be nice to be able to see them and check their credentials and check their background. Because, a lot of this channeling, when you really get into it, gets into so much trouble. Because you don't know what type of entity you're talking to, and how much of it is the channeler, etc. And it's dangerous for the channelers. They often go insane. And oftentimes it takes quite a negative turn after a period of time, and can become very distorted. And it's so predictable, all the stuff. You give me all these books on channeling, you give me let me read the first few pages, and I'll just rewrite the rest of the book. They all follow the same theme, the Exalted 3, or the Magnificent 10, or the Incredible 13, or the One and Only, and telling all this information, which is pretty well scripted. It's almost standard archetypal energy type stuff. And quite frankly, I'd rather go to a very good counselor or a wise man who I know who's living, and I can check his credentials, because that stuff is so fraught with danger and unpredictability.
Just like the UFO field. I mean, there's so many people that think that they know how many different kinds of aliens there are, and they're...
Yeah, well, I was actually secretary of the Australian UFO Society for a number of years, many years ago.
What was that like?
I got some very convincing film footage and some very convincing stories. and stuff from what I would call very genuine reports from real, airline pilots and fighter pilots who at the time would never have even bought into that in the slightest. And so I was convinced I was seeing something. I also got film footage taken by amateurs that back in the days of Super 8 movies that you couldn't use Photoshop and all the tricks on. So
have any Bigfoot UFO things?
No.
Sometimes those two
Australian's much more boring as far as that goes. But the problem is
what was the strangest UFO? Well, finish your thought.
Applying your logic. The big problem when you get told things like by fortune tellers or channelers and that. Again, it comes down to the opposite in that credibility thing. When we try to discard thing, what you'll get is people who they get told 10 things. I remember one of the more famous channelers came to Australia, and a whole group of people involved in rebirthing went to it, and they visited and they listened to this thing for a weekend, and they came away, you made all these predictions about this and that, and there's going to be this and this and this and this. And I said, did you tape it? And they did. Can you give me the tapes? And what I did is I had it transcribed by my secretary, broke it all down on the computer, and I listed all the predictions. There were a lot of them, right? And I let it be like that, because they were all for the next year or so. About 18 months later, I saw the group, and I said, hey, how do you think that guy went with all these predictions? Oh, wasn't he incredible? He was like 100% accurate. Everything he said was true, like he predicted the outcome of the next election. Well, that election was a shoo-in. The guy, Bob Hawke, was had 80% of approval rating. And I said, do you know that in fact he was actually 30% correct? What do you mean? I said, you have only remembered the ones he was right in, but you have conveniently forgotten all the ones he was wrong in. And I showed them the transcript, and I showed them all the predictions. He didn't say that, so I played this tape for them. And they were flabbergasted, because in fact he was, you get 50-50 as at least possible on most predictions, but at 30% he was 70% wrong. But you know what happened? Everyone was so impressed because they so wanted to believe him that they remembered the 30%. And it's like when you go to a fortune teller, they tell you 15 things, 2 of them are right, but they're the ones you remember. And you conveniently forget the others, because if you want to believe it, you'll do that. If you want to not believe it, you'll remember the things that they're wrong in and forget about the things they're right in. This is human nature. And that's the great danger whenever you're involved in any of this type of work.
Regarding predictions, there people talk about 2012 and that's the end of the Mayan calendar and whether or not disembodied masters will be there to help us transition.
Have you seen how many predictions that have come and gone that just didn't work out? We had the last few years we've had all the planets light up and nothing happened. We got through 1985 and 1975 and God knows what. I've spent my life observing many predictions, and they've fizzled out so many times. It's not funny. No, I don't get caught up in those things. Yeah, I'll wait till it happens.
Well, we're winding down. Anything to say about Satori's? Your wife Esther has talked about the Satori's she had, and I've run into that with other people who have witnessed. I don't see paranormal activity as an end. I see people pass through it. They see things. It opens their minds. It opens their mind a bit, and they move on.
We all very often, if we're in a spiritual pathway or a personal growth development, will have life-changing experiences, phenomenon, and things that occur. I've had encounters and brushes with death, for example, on several occasions where I was certain I was about to die and that it was inevitable, and as a result I went through a very powerful shift in consciousness. If it wasn't a so-called near-death experience, because they don't exist. You either die or you don't die. If you come back from a near-death experience, it's because you didn't die. But what you will do is, when you think you are dying or about to die, you'll often get a whole lot of flashes and a whole lot of mental stuff, and some of it seems to have a pretty strong influence on you. And certainly we all have. I've gone through periods where, yes, I've gone through a period where I felt very strong surges of energy, and I suddenly found myself able to heal somebody, or heal an animal and touch them and they healed. the city, the magical power, as it were, of healing. But I've also seen it pass. But what it did is it showed me potential. It showed me that, yes, there's not more to life than meets the eye. So I'm grateful for those experiences, but I'm also grateful that I was able to pass through them and not dwell on them or try and grab them back, because they were actually just pointers to let me know everything is not as it seems. And there is a lot more to life than we first realized, and that we do have to open our minds. But at the same time, it's one thing to be open-minded, it's another thing to be gullible. And it's another thing to try and, force things to happen. I'm very careful about being skeptical. I'm very careful about looking logically at things and looking at things clearly. But at the same time, I'm the first person to tell you that there's a great deal more out there than we can ever imagine.
One more thing that I passed through, sort of like the paranormal thing, that I feel like has validity, but society doesn't, is conspiracy theory. I think that a person who thinks about conspiracies is at least questioning. And sure, some people go off the deep end with it, but what about those who don't? What about those who actually learn something about how their society's set up? And
yeah, and I'm sure there's a whole lot of conspiracies going on in there.
Do you have a favorite conspiracy?
No, I don't.
Who rules the world?
I went through the phases. So, I actually had lunch a few times with David Yellop, who wrote The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail. So probably I had more interested in the church conspiracies and the Masonic Lodge, and there's the things like the Da Vinci Code writes about.
Please talk about the Masonic angle, because that's very important to this story as well. As much as you can.
Well,
feel like
purely
you
in
can
so
talk
much
about.
as there's protected knowledge, and that's gone through history, and whether you want to think the Holy Grail is actually the birth line of Jesus, based on the principle that Jesus did in fact get married to Mary Magdalene and have children, and that those children have continued to breed, and that there are now descendants of Jesus alive, and that the search of the Holy Grail was really to search for the descendants of Jesus. And there's a lot of other versions of that. But certainly, ancient knowledge is heavily protected. But, that's happened in all civilizations, the protection of knowledge. In so many civilizations, you've had governments and things like that where you can't afford to put down on paper the truths, the knowledge. So what you had to do is you had to put it down in coded form, and then have a society that has the oral version of the code to interpret it, so that and then that had to be perpetuated. And to do that, you had to have a society that was secret and had tests to guard that knowledge and to ensure only the right people do it. And the world has been full of a lot of societies like that. The Shankara line, the Indian philosophies, they say in the Vedas, the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, were all written in code. In other words, if you read them straight, they don't tell you much. But if you know the code, you get told a lot. So they have the line of the Shankara disciples who know the code. And when you get far enough into the philosophy, you can meet one of those, and they then interpret what it's really about. And this occurred in the Kabbalah, in the Jewish tradition, and the Zoran, and in virtually all the different the Catholic religions and so on, that you have these protections. Sometimes they're protecting information, knowledge. Sometimes they're protecting ancient artifacts or religious relics or whatever. And they seem to be a necessary part of living. And in the same way, let's face it, in government, so many people get elected to high office in government, and once they get into government and they then find out what's really going on, they change their mind. They actually change their policies. But, we say, well, why don't they tell the public? Because if they told the public, it would be a disaster, because the average person, the public, cannot understand the nuances of government, international affairs, interactions. And, why don't we just go in and do that? Well, the reason we don't is because this, and this, and if we do this could cause an economic collapse of this country, which would in turn cause us to collapse, etc. In healthcare, which is something dear to my heart. This you hear of people, and I've heard of quite a few people who have developed very, very powerful systems, cures that have had it repressed. Right? Now, the fact of the matter is, the reality is this: if I was President of the United States of America, and I had a gentleman come to me, and he had a formula from the jungles of Ecuador or somewhere like that, that was a absolutely certifiable cure for cancer, right? And I got it tested by my chief of health, and yes, it is a cure for cancer. I would probably have that guy killed and have that formula put under lock and key and completely withheld from the public. Why? Because right now there's about 55 million people in America with cancer. The average person with cancer, the business it generates for the average person is about $400,000 per person. When you look at medical costs, hospital costs, florists, taxis, all the different things, all the support industries, about $400,000. If you multiply $400,000 by 54 million people, you have the biggest industry in America, by far. If you suddenly wipe that industry out with a cure for cancer and cure all those people, you would literally destroy the economy of America. You would cause a total economic collapse of America, which would be far more devastating and far more destructive than what the cancer is at the moment. So therefore, it would be totally irresponsible for the president to release that cure. Do you follow me? Because you have to take in the big picture. And that's an example of the type of thinking that has to occur, that we think very simple, we've got this, let's do it. But they've got think tanks to think of what are the reactions if we do that? What are the ramifications? And this is why you think you've thought it through, and a guy like John Kerry would say, or Bill Clinton would say, but now you've told me this, I've got to change my mind. So they're called flip-floppers. But in the light of extra information, you sometimes have to change. And the fact of the matter is, there are reasons behind a lot of the things we do that can't be shared with the public, because if you told the public, I actually have a cure for cancer, but I'm withholding it, well, I can tell you, those 54 million people and their relatives would cause a few problems for you. So you have to keep it secret. And keeping it secret is a conspiracy. Against those 54 million people.
Do you feel like that there's a similar thing with fears of terrorism? Do you feel like that terrorism has now become an industry? I mean, I sort of feel that way.
Terrorism's an industry, AIDS is an industry, many things are an industry. And it's not necessarily an industry they wanted, but once it becomes an industry, it is an industry. And to suddenly change it is, a problem. War is an industry. Let's face it, the American economy is set up that if we don't have fairly regular war, we get into real trouble. War is the biggest way to boost the economy.
Well, there's usually dozens going on at once.
Yeah, and there's a lot more than we realize, in the world, because our reporting is we only report the wars that we want to report. Mm-hmm. And you could say that's conspiracy, but let's face it, if the average American read the newspaper and the first 10 pages outlined what's going on in the 52 wars that are going on in the world right now, and all the people that are getting killed, mayhem, and all the chaos, it would be rather depressing, wouldn't it? So you've got to limit it. And they do limit the press, and they do bring in values that say there's just so much you can do. In the same way that they bring this in that most newspapers won't report a suicide, because they know that if you report a suicide and you report the way the suicide occurs, there's enough depressed people out there who will copycat it and do suicide. So there is a conspiracy to only print certain news, not all news. That is a conspiracy. But is it a good conspiracy? Yes, it probably is. And is it a conspiracy not to tell everybody every grubby detail of what goes on in international politics? Yes, it is a conspiracy. Is it a good one? It probably is, because the average person couldn't handle it. We have to accept certain realities.
Do you feel like that there's do you have any opinions about what the secret knowledge might be with the Masons and the the whole Illuminati thing?
But it's secret.
For instance, One of my theories is that Jesus really wasn't a real person. They sort of took the Buddha story and maybe the Osiris story and blended them together. And
there's a historic person there, but there's just a lot more stories around it. You can get great information of that. Barbara Tierman's book, Jesus the Man, outlines in great detail and great depth the story of Jesus. She was the one that they brought into, actually, the woman they put in charge of the Dead Sea Scrolls when they found them, and she examined them for some 30 years, retired from that, and then wrote a book. And it's a brilliant book, and it outlines the whole, explanation of what was going on. And sure, a lot of it is still kept pretty under cap and key, because some of it, a lot of very devout Christians wouldn't want to know. You see, one of the problems here is, again, they say, I've met priests who have had access to the Vatican archives to say that most of this stuff the Vatican already knows about, the fact that Jesus married Magdalene and had children and things like that. The trouble is, that is out there, there's books on it, but it's not read by the masses. Now, again, there's a conspiracy here, but if I was again made Pope, right, God bless me, and I was made Pope, and it became aware, and my archbishops came up to me and said, look, this is true. Jesus didn't really die on the cross, and he did live for longer, and he did have kids, etc., etc. Then as a good and responsible Pope, the last thing I'd do is announce that and tell the truth about it. Because right now, there are millions of people living in South America and other parts of the country who are living in misery, they're living in poverty, and the only thing they've got to hang on to is their religion, the passage from the Bible that says the meek shall inherit the earth, the promise of an afterlife, the promise of being saved of their sins and going to heaven. Because if they didn't have that, their life would be absolute misery. So the religion provides a tremendous comfort to multiple millions of people. And if the Pope got up and took away that from them, there would be mass mayhem and death. They would suicide. They would go into chaos. It would create a catastrophe. So therefore, a responsible, caring, loving Pope would not expose that truth or admit to it. He would do a cover-up because of the practical realities of what would happen if he did. So therefore, if I was Pope, I would do the same thing. The fact of the matter is that the average person does not have the intellectual capacity to take the truth. And even if they want to look for it, they can read about it and everything like that, but they'll still it can't be true because it's only hardly read by anybody. We have to be very aware that there are times when there are times when these secrets are secrets because it's necessary they're secrets. It sounds like a real bummer, of course, and none of us like that because we don't want to be kept in the dark. We can handle it, but maybe we couldn't. There is chaos in the world.
Yeah.
There is chaos in the world. There is a sorting out process. In our tradition of philosophy, it's called the period of Kala Yuga, which is the period of communication, where we are suddenly opening up with massive communication and massive increase in knowledge. But with communication, the fact that now we can see all these things and look into other countries straight away, we're becoming aware of something that was there all along. But because of the communication, we talk about it and know about it, whereas before we were in blissful ignorance. And so now we're aware that basically the human race at the moment is not doing a very good job. And the basic principles and philosophies we're using aren't working that well. And let's face it, systems of government, democracy does not work well. Our democracy that we have in America is wonderful, but it's full of corruption, because the nature of it is that you can't get anywhere in it unless you are corrupt, because you couldn't afford to run for president unless you're going to get money the wrong way. And in fact, history shows that the only really stable governments that worked for long periods of time very well were benevolent dictatorships, because we don't want to hear that. And the problem is, a benevolent dictatorship can often turn into a non-benevolent dictator, just with analogy reaction or a blow to the head. So we haven't worked it out, and yet we're going to, I feel, in 200 years' time, we'll be reading history books about the dark ages of the 21st century.
Well, it seems like with this increased ability to communicate, there's also a danger there, with false information being planted in, and then suddenly, this ability to
and
just
the
influence
tremendous ability to distort. Let's face it, we can't rely on photographs anymore. We can't rely on audio anymore, because anyone can make anything of anybody. That is also a great disruptive process, and it may be that all this disruption and all this chaos is exactly what is necessary to cause a reevaluation and rethinking of the way we do things. And out of it will come a lot of strength. We'll try and be optimistic about that. And it could be chaotic, but again, conspiracy. Let's face it, just say, I knew without a shadow of a doubt that the world's going to end in 2 days' time. Would you really want me to tell you? Would you really?
I wouldn't.
Because what would you do? Do you follow me? So what would be the point of telling you? Wouldn't you rather I kept a conspiracy of silence until it actually happened? I think most people would. Some people, oh no, I'd want to be told. So you can do what? You've got 2 days to live. Right? And we've got to be realistic about this. And it is a big, wide, wonderful world out there, and we just have to make sure that we realise there is a process going on. And probably in the big scheme of things, this chaos at the moment is something very necessary for us to evolve into a higher level of consciousness.
November 10th, 2004. November 10th, 2004. Levecke has more. Her daughter has had some recent encounters. She's age 8, which is a key time period for children and the paranormal.
Well, Russ, about a couple days ago, Emma had a time when she came running out of her room one night, wanted to get into bed with us. She was really upset, and so she got into bed with us, and then the next morning we said, what was that bad dream you had? What was that about? What happened? And she said, well, I was sleeping and I woke up, and she has curtains around her bed. She opened the curtains and looked out and looked up at the light that is in the ceiling, in her ceiling. And Emma's room is very dark at night. She doesn't have a night light, and the curtains black it out, and her walls are red, so it's really dark in Emma's room at night. And she looked up at the ceiling lamp, and she said that there was all these shapes coming out of the lamp. And she said one side was good shapes and one side was bad shapes. And that the shapes had different colors to them, and that's kind of a little bit of what told her whether they were good or bad. So we asked her some questions to ask about what the shapes, I was like, what does that mean, shapes? And she said that that they kind of look, that they looked like they had bodies. It wasn't really well formed. She described it as kind of like a hologram. She could see through them, and that they had faces, but it wasn't really well defined, and they had body, parts, arms and legs, but it wasn't really clear. And that what would happen is they would sort of float, she said, kind of like a bubble, that they would just sort of float down to the ground, and then when they hit the carpet, they would disappear down into the carpet, as if, someone were standing somewhere, and then they, slowly went lower and lower and lower. It wasn't like they just evaporated or anything. It's like they descended into the carpet. And she said that that it was something that had happened to her a lot when she was younger, and that's why she used to come running out of her room when she was little. But she said that it hadn't happened for a couple of years. And when it happened about a week ago, it was the first time it had happened in many years. And she said that what she did was she came running out of her room that night and went into the bathroom. And when she turned the light on in the bathroom and looked at the wall, she saw one of the shapes. It was kind of greenish. It wasn't a good one on the wall in the bathroom. So then she got left there quickly and came into our room. It was the first time she'd ever told us anything like that, and it was great, actually. Both Charles and I were there, and we probably talked to her for about half an hour, 45 minutes. And she was willing to kind of share with us, and
we were
asked her
told
a lot of questions.
Yeah.
What?
We were told to shut up, or to not think about it, too. We weren't supported as kids.
Well, I think for Charles and I we were both working really hard to kind of listen and not be too weirded out by it. Because I was like thinking, whoa, that's really scary. But I really didn't want to like go on about that because I didn't want her to feel that way.
So she saw different kinds of faces, the same face, old.
All different kinds. And the big thing for her was different colors. There were bright reds and greens, and that those were friendly and good, and one side was good and one side was bad.
Mm-hmm.
And then the ones that were bad were more obscured and dark. Well, I don't know what for Emma, age 8 is definitely, in my memory, that's the time when you come out of that your own insular child world where everything's inward and all about you, and you start to really look at the world around you and see. That's when I first learned that my mother wasn't perfect, because I thought my parents were absolutely perfect in every way, and that's when I learned that there was so much more going on, and was able to look out at that inward child time. And I know that Emma's probably right now really struggling a lot with just her own emotions. She's having a very emotional, hormonal-based emotional time. And so she's herself really emotionally up and down, and kind of going back and forth between being really good and being really awful. So maybe, the other thing that was interesting is when we're talking about this, Charles said, oh yeah, I've had that happen to me when I was a kid too.
The faces?
Coming out of the light. I was like, what? You never told me that before. I was like, yeah, it happened to me. I used to go running into my parents' room at night. I was really surprised to hear that.
I was always afraid of seeing a face
Mm-hmm.
coming in the window, looking in the window, but I
am to this day.
I never really saw one.
I'm to this day. I don't like being out in the country when it's dark. I would never be inside in a lit room with it dark outside and sit by a window. To this day, I would never do that. Even in the city, I hate the feeling of things looking in at me.
Uh-huh.
I hate that. It really scares me. And I don't really like being out in the woods and the country and things out in the woods. I just always feel like there's things in the woods. And so what I'm seeing is that she's having a lot of trouble with just controlling her emotions. She feels everything a lot more strongly. She's always been felt things very strongly, but now it's even more powerful. And she will get really angry or really sad, out of proportion with what you'd expect.
Okay, so it sounds like it's you when you were pregnant
With Emma.
You had an experience. Tell us about that.
Oh, I had this dream that I think I was about midway through the pregnancy, and again, very realistic dream. It took place in my bedroom. Everything looked as it does, not in a dreamlike state where things are altered. It really looked like my room. we have these big skylights in our ceilings, and there was this light, and I was taken onto this alien ship and examined and brought back. And I don't really don't remember any details about the dream, but I remember that I was really, really afraid when I woke up. There's a lot, my body was just filled with fear. But I only remember that I was taken and examined and brought back. And then when I had that other experience that I talked about where Emma was a week old and something came and visited me, and I felt that, it was checking on Emma and that everything, was a kind thing, I remember in my mind thinking, is this an alien-based visitor? Or is this somebody, is this just a visitor of somebody who died, or is this alien-based? Because I remember connecting it back to the dream that I had when I was midway through my pregnancy and thinking, oh God, great, got an alien kid.
So this second thing you're talking about was the good, you called it a good visit, or what was that?
Oh, when I was I talked about it on the tape before where something came and visited and sort of
Emma.
Came and visited Emma when she was about a week old, and I could feel the pressure of it moving up my body and coming to rest on my stomach and being really afraid, but out of control, and but that I got the information or the feeling somehow that this thing was not anything to do with me, that it was here for Emma, and that it was checking, and that everything was fine, and that it just needed to make sure everything was all right, and clearly everything was, and then it was going to be on its way, and that was the end of it. But I remember thinking that it was connected to this alien dream that I had, and I remember thinking, oh great, I got an alien kid.
But you also said your husband was there was a connection there that he was born in Cocoa Beach, right? Which
born
is where
Cocoa Beach?
Timmy Burnham, my Mothman friend from childhood, is living now. And your husband your husband's dad was an aeronautical engineer.
Yeah.
Similar to Harriet's dad at the time, same time period.
He was an Army guy too, so he had a military connection. Discharged. He was
based in Florida, right?
He had been in World War II, so he must have some military connection as well.
And
Charles said he had, when Emma told us about her, shapes coming out of the lamp, he said, oh yeah, I had that happen to me when I was a kid too. And didn't really...
And his father has never talked about his work. It's always been sort of a secret.
Yeah.
And being an aeronautical engineer, like Harriet's father, and my father was an electrical engineer. Mm-hmm. These guys, working on secret things, can't talk about it. It's one of the theories I have is that, and others have talked about, is that there's a higher prevalence of this kind of activity in families of people that do this kind of work for some reason.
Interesting. What's weird is that it's interesting how we accept all these odd things and then just continue to move on and don't ever take them out and examine them more with greater depth. It's just like, oh yeah, that happened, and then you just kind of move on, and you don't step back and examine it more deeply or discuss it or even think, wow, I need more information on this. You just keep moving forward, just keep going on, not a big deal. Charles had a lot of, things to say about Emma's experience, that he just feels she has an overactive imagination that isn't being allowed to be exercised enough during the day, and so at night still needs to get out, and that, I don't know, he has all these other theories about what it's about. And
what are the other theories?
His other theories are that maybe her eyes are more sensitive to seeing, that there's always things moving around, and, there's currents in the air, and even just yeast moving about in the air. It's a thing that's got its life, and it moves about through the air currents. Maybe the light was still warm and was pushing things around, but...
Well, these faces have shown up in other areas, like, for instance, in the crop circle, one of the crop circle books I have, there was I think it was at a site of a crop circle, somebody took a picture of one, and you can see the face, and there's a psychic who claims to be communicating with this entity even. So it can get more involved. Not that you want it to be, but...
Well, Emma has always seen faces in everything. She's been... that's kind of a natural thing for babies anyway. Babies are always looking for the basic face shape. That's what's bred into us. But I will say, in addition, just looking at every examination is... another thing that is interesting about Emma is that our first floor of our house is a circular floor plan, and it all connects. Emma will never walk through the dining room at night. She will not go that way. She can't go that way. She's terrified of our dining room at night. Will never walk through there.
Wow.
She won't go that way. She said there's too many scary faces on the wall. And she's actually always said that. I think that's another thing where I've actually never said that out loud or taken a moment to step back and say, whoa, that needs a deeper examination. I've just accepted that. Oh, okay, sure. But she will not go through the dining room. It's really hard to get her to go that way any time of day, but at night there's no way in hell she's going through the dining room. It's just too scary. And even Lila, who's really not into that, she won't go through the dining room either. She hates the dining room. We eat dinner in there at night, but otherwise they avoid that room. Isn't that interesting?
Do you hear a low hum?
Yeah, coming from there. Yeah, it sounds like somebody outside maybe has some trimmer on, or...
It's pulsating, it's kind of going...
No, I don't hear that. It's solid. It's a solid hum.
Charles's wife Levecke earlier told us about a similar kind of thing, and so and it's something that I had as a kid as well. So apparently this weekend she had it was in Victoria.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Emma had, I guess what you'd call a paranormal episode. So Emma, who in our family we sometimes call her Emma Faye because she's Faye. So what happened in Victoria was that she was in Victoria with her class from school, and they went to the Parliament building, and they went to the Provincial Museum, and then some of them were going to go to the Empress, and some of them were going to go to the China Gate. And they got to choose. Oh, who wants to go to the Empress? Go over here. And who wants to go to the China Gate? Go over there. Emma didn't really want to go to the Empress or the China Gate, so she hadn't decided. And I guess everybody else had decided, and she was the last one left. And people. So the teacher or one of the chaperones turned to her and said, "Emma, would you like to go to the Empress or the China Gate?" And she said that at that time she said that she could hear what everybody was thinking. And so there was this whole cacophony of voices in her head, which was everybody's thoughts, and they were all focused on her. And they were saying, "Emma, choose Empress or China Gate. Make a decision, Emma. Come on, Emma, choose one." And that all this thought directed at her all at once, and with her being able to hear these thoughts, it was just overwhelming. And she burst into tears and kind of had this little crying breakdown until I guess she could no longer hear all the voices, and then she felt better. I actually don't know what she chose, Empress or China Gate. We didn't get to that. That was just not part of the story. So,
but at least no one was saying bad things mentally about her.
No, it was all very
positive. It wasn't
positive.
like, oh, you got that, you wore that dress today, and I don't like,
Yeah, Emma has told us at other times that that she can't sleep because she can hear what everybody's thinking, which is, kind of not really a great idea for me, because quite often I'm going to bed at the same time, and I really don't like the idea that those last thoughts I have at night before I go to bed are being monitored by anyone, particularly an 8-year-old girl. But
Did you verify? Were you able to check to see if indeed she was reading what you're actually thinking?
oh, I don't know. I could tell you what I was thinking. I mean, if it
Why
happened,
don't you
like,
check that out?
yeah, I think next time I will. I'm very quick to go to sleep. So quite often I go to sleep within a minute of getting into bed.
Could this be why most parents try to discourage this kind of thing?
Oh,
That way they don't have
I don't
to
think
have
it's
their
like
thoughts read.
Tobimori the cat, in the Saki short story. But I think it's, I think that a lot of people would find this either disturbing, not because they believe it, but disturbing because they don't believe it. Why is my child making up this story? Or is my child psychotic and is hearing voices and is attributing them to, the thoughts of the people around her?
It's just a natural process.
I'm okay with it. And from the time Emma was very little, we let her know that we were okay with this and that this was a good thing and that she could tell us about this and that we won't, laugh at her or think she's weird or wicked or...
She might even get a television show someday. No, you know what I mean. I mean,
I know what you mean.
It's a valuable technique. As I was saying, I have a friend of mine in LA has one of his clients is a psychic and gets paid a lot of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars, to go and advise corporations.
Advise
in Japan.
corporations, wow. Well, there's that guy who was on TV, communicating with people on the other side. But, I don't really, we don't really have a commercial interest in it. Our interest is that our child be happy with who she is and well adjusted. And if who she is somebody who can periodically hear other people's thoughts, then how can we help her be okay with that? And if who she is somebody who can never hear anybody else's thoughts, well, how can we help her to be okay with that?
Before Emma came around, I would definitely say that I was an atheist. I really just felt, when you're dead, and that's the end of it all. But then Emma was such a strange person, and there were so many strange experiences that happened with her that I started to think maybe there are connections to people who have lived before or visit us who are dead, because that's what happened with her a lot, and she had a lot of things go on that really frightened me, actually, and made me think, okay, maybe there's something, maybe when people are dead, they're not dead. So I'd say I moved into the agnostic camp.
Okay. Is there one of those events that you can think of that you'd like to talk about? Just to give people an example of what you're talking about.
Well, there's two big ones for me with Emma that really stand out. And when Emma was a week old, I was sleeping with her in our front bedroom, which at the time was a guest room, and it's always been a strange room. My mother's had some experiences in that room, and it's just always been a strange room, but I wasn't really thinking about that. And, we had a bed set up in there, and I was nursing Emma, and she was about a week old, and the door was shut, and my glasses were off, and it was totally dark in the room, and Emma was sleeping in the crook of my arm, and I felt this weight on the bed starting at my feet, and I remember opening my eyes and thinking, what the hell was that? And I looked around, and it was clearly, I was awake. It was my bedroom. It was the bedroom I was in, and I couldn't see. I was looking straight up at the ceiling, and I knew that the door was shut, so it wasn't a cat. And the pressure was like somebody sitting on my legs, and it slowly moved up my body and got to about my mid-torso, my stomach area, and then the pressure just stayed there, and I was still looking straight up at the ceiling. I didn't look down because I was really terrified because something had moved up my body and it just came to rest there. And I was just like paralyzed with fear, and I kind of just lay there for a while, unable to do anything, even though I had a newborn that I was supposed to protect, and just lay there thinking, shit. And then I just kind of got the feeling somehow, the information that this thing, pressure, was not there for me, didn't have anything to do with me. It was there for Emma, and that it was benevolent in nature. It wasn't anything evil, and that it was there to check on Emma. It was for all about Emma, and it was a connection between the two of them, and then it was gone. And then I just went right back to sleep and didn't remember that had happened until the next night when I lay down to go to bed, and then it came back to me and I remembered what had happened. And then I got out of bed and I went, holy shit, Charles, guess what happened to me last night? I can't believe I didn't even remember this. And that was the beginning with Emma. And then
There was another incident?
there was one when Emma was about not yet older than 1.5. She was a pretty big talker. I mean, God, there's a million Emma stories, but our cat that we'd had a long time, who was 12, that we had, raised from like a 2-day-old kitten, she died. And it was like the next day, and we were taking Emma up to bed, and we were on the stairs, just turning the corner from the front door, going up the stairs. And Emma said, Mommy, I see Squeaky is there. And I said, oh, no, honey, she died. We're not going to see her again. She said, no, she's right there. And I just started to cry. That freaked me out. It really freaked me out.
Didn't someone tell you, see Emma as a child and say she was Fae or something like that?
Oh, God, yeah. Emma, first of all, Emma could never be put down. Emma always had to be held all the time, and she never slept for more than 20 to 45 minutes at a shot. She was very restless. So we always carried her everywhere, and we had a front pack, and, Lila was 2, and we had places to go, so she was out all the time. And every day we'd be out, and if there's 7 days in a week, 5 of those days we'd have some kind of interaction with someone, whether it would be Emma would be in the grocery store, and then some 40-year-old man without kids is way over there, and she'd pull him in. He'd have to come over and look at her and say something like, hi, or wow. She'd just pull people in. They had to come to her. And then sometimes it'd be, people would say, she's got second sight, or it'd be, someone who'd say, one time I had this teenager come to me. We were in a waiting room. Emma had a fever in LA, and this teenager came up to me. They didn't really come to me. Nobody ever came to me. They were always coming to Emma, and they just said, she's been here before. This is not her first time here. Or a lot of times people say, oh, she's a very old soul. Or sometimes people just come over and need to connect with her. It's like she just pulled people in and they had to connect with her. So we had a lot of different levels of interactions, whether it was just a connection or somebody saying, ooh, or I remember we'd be at parties and people would say to me, oh, I've got second sight and I can tell that, she does too. And I just feel like, wow, weird. This is really weird. So that
I think I said something when you were pregnant that about her being a girl, and some spiritual feelings about that.
She's always been, and what happened was I really struggled with it. It really stressed me out. It really bothered me. I was really, really uncomfortable with it. And what happened was I talked to some people, and I reached a point when she was about 2.5 where I said, okay, what I need to do to support this person is I need to make her feel good about what she's got going on. I need to let her know that it's okay to tell me stuff. I need to let her feel good instead of you know, a lot of her stuff that she'd do would frighten me. I'd feel really afraid and weirded out. Or
I mean, like she would predict things or know?
Well, like one time I was in the kitchen and she was over in another room around the corner, but within earshot of me, and I was cooking something, and I thought in my head, God, where's that wooden spoon? I want that big wooden spoon. Emma came around the corner. She was like under two. She comes around the corner, comes into the kitchen, goes straight to the kitchen drawer, opens the drawer, digs around, pulls out the wooden spoon I'm looking for, and hands it to me. And I never said anything out loud, and she didn't know what I was doing. I mean, coincidence? Sure, you know, maybe she knows to give me a spoon when I'm cooking. I don't know. But that kind of stuff just really weirded me out. Plus, Emma's known in the family as someone who can find stuff. Emma finds everything that's missing. Emma knows where it is. And as a family, we kind of embrace that and say, you know, you got a problem, go see Emma. She'll know where it is, and she finds everything. Lila lost her retainer. She went to a sleepover party last Friday. The retainer got thrown out with the party garbage, and we went on Sunday morning and went through the person's garbage, and guess we found the retainer.
Did Emma know that it was in the garbage?
No. I mean, she never said anything weird or, you know.
Because that's a common psychic ability, finding
Emma
things.
finds stuff. And Emma's always been just a really, just the kind of person that people feel comfortable sharing stuff with or talking to. And she's very sensitive. She kind of gets a big picture of sensitivity and thoughtfulness. And she's very wise. So, ask me one question and I'll go on for 10 minutes.
But you support her. Your point was, I think,
yeah.
that you're trying to be supportive of that.
Well, what happened was around age 2.5 is I kind of said, okay, what I need to do is really support her and not get freaked out every time this happens. And once I kind of made that mental step and kind of talked to Emma a little bit and said, you know, kind of encouraged her to talk to me about stuff or feel comfortable, a lot of the stuff kind of stopped. A lot of the stuff stopped.
She was seeing spirits and stuff, right?
Yeah, and she had never been able to sleep alone. I mean, she's struggled with, she's never slept well, and she could never, we had put her in that front bedroom when she had a crib. She could never be in there. Never. She couldn't handle being in there. She couldn't sleep. She never slept. She always had to sleep with us. And even now, she's 8, and she really struggles. She'll have like 4 or 5 nights ago, it was like 10 o'clock at night, and she came in and said, Mom, I can't sleep. I can hear everybody's thoughts. I can hear what everybody's thinking. And that was the first time in a long time that's happened. But you know, she needs cozy, safe places to sleep. She's not comfortable. She's just now got a bed again. She's trying to sleep in a bed. She slept in a teepee for 2 years. She really wanted a teepee. When she was 5, she came to me and said, I want to sleep in a teepee. And I was like, okay. So we bought her a teepee, and she slept in the teepee for 2 years.
Do you think that she's got a Native American connection going on, or?
I don't know. That would be purely conjecture on my part. I have no idea.
Any other Native American things she's brought up, though? Like,
you know,
does she want to wear moccasins, or?
No. She's...
But that seemed to help, living in the teepee? Or
that was
sleeping
really good. She really liked that. She slept there for 2 years, and then the last year, we kind of made a bed for her on the floor in her closet, which was a very small... It's a walk-in closet, but it's cozy and small and safe, and she's a really special person.
So does that happen often, where she's hearing thoughts?
No, it's the first time she's ever said that to me. You know, she said I can.
Well, age 8 is a big year for the paranormal. You know, it's like if you're for a child who.
stuff from Mars in it. From the bottom of a bad well. Oh well, just don't swallow it whole. Cause it's tea milk. You drink it every day. Tea milk, it's a toxic spill. Tea milk, you drink it anyway. Tea milk, don't take it with your pill. I'm hearing your words and seeing you, but I don't know what you're talking about. Hearing your words and seeing you, but I don't know what you're talking about.